I call Chris Hipkins, 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My goodness me. I'm very happy to take a call on the Radio New Zealand Amendment Bill. My last contribution was so good. I'm very happy to take a call on this bill. My cold is catching up with me, so you'll have to forgive me if my voice is not perhaps quite as booming as it was in my last contribution. I have got some water, so I'll be fine. Look, I'm very strongly in favour of this bill, and it is good to see that it is finally being progressed through the House. I think it's disappointing that it has taken such a long period of time to get it through the House. Of course, the Radio New Zealand Act requires that the Radio New Zealand Charter is reviewed every 5 years. So the fact that this is based on a review that happened nearly 10 years ago means that we're probably a couple of reviews behind, and hopefully there'll be further amendments required and coming through in due course. Because I think one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that technological change is happening really rapidly in this area. And for this, I'm just reading through the charter that's attached to this bill, it's important to note the really strong emphasis that's placed on broadcasting within that. And yet the lines between broadcasting and other forms of technology are becoming so blurred now that there will inevitably need to be further change and further evolution in this area. Because actually, Radio New Zealand, in my strong view, shouldn't necessarily be about necessarily public non-commercial broadcast content, but public non-commercial content, and making sure that that is widely available. And that will be through a variety of different mediums, including online content, and Radio New Zealand are increasingly doing more work in that area, and I think that that's a very welcome thing. Programs about colds, sore throats, all of those things as well would be useful. But I think Judith Collins was wrong when she said that commercial broadcasters in New Zealand don't get 1 cent of government subsidy. That's not true. As Gareth Hughes has just pointed out, MediaWorks have done pretty well out of the current government. And I want to say, and she mentioned a few high-profile broadcasters in her contribution, including Paul Henry, Mike Hosking and others. I want to say I think that it's absolutely fine. I think there is a legitimate place in the New Zealand media for those voices, just as there is a legitimate place for the John Campbells and others. I think that really what we should be aiming for in New Zealand is a wide diversity of views and opinions within the New Zealand media. But the bit that Radio New Zealand fills within that, the niche, if you like, that Radio New Zealand fills within that, is that they can do more in-depth fact-checking, more in-depth investigative journalism, which the commercial broadcasters and commercial media outlets are struggling to do, not because they don't want to do it, not because the journalists working for those organisations aren't very, very good journalists, they are. It's simply that they are far more resource constrained. And if the commercial media environment cannot fund that level of investigative journalism, inquiry and diverse debate, then we do need as a society to ensure that it is publicly available in some other form. And Radio New Zealand in the radio sphere has certainly been a bastion of that. I think that I've heard people on the other side of the House, of course, refer to Radio New Zealand as a bastion of left-wing propaganda. Radio New Zealand deals with facts, and they are one of the organisations that does a lot of fact-checking. Now, if dealing in facts makes them left-wing, then yes, I guess they're going to have to wear that particular label. But I don't believe that they have any bias politically. I think what they do, I don't believe Radio New Zealand is politically biased at all. I actually think that they strive very, very hard not to be politically biased. But I think, and there are some journalists out there who make no bones about their political bias, and that's fine if they're open and upfront about it. And I think Radio New Zealand try very carefully to not do that as the state broadcaster. I think that we have a lot less bias in Radio New Zealand, for example, than we do in Television New Zealand, where Mike Hosking's editorials are very biased, but he's upfront about that. And that's okay, but I think that there's a need to balance that by ensuring that an equally compelling alternative view is put forward. And I don't think that Television New Zealand do that very well. I think they let New Zealand down as the nation's television broadcaster and not providing that diversity, something I know Radio New Zealand strive very, very hard to do. So I'm very supportive of this bill. I'm also very supportive of the government taking the foot off Radio New Zealand's throat in terms of the funding constraints that they have been under, but overall a good piece of legislation.